Good morning. Hey, the guy in the t-shirt on the video was, that's Joe. He's making his debut host announcement. I don't know, what do we call that? Yeah, I don't know, that's worth clapping about. He's a goofball. I'm pointing it out because, first of all, Joe, we're from down south? Memphis, Tennessee. You guys get the draw a little bit? I just feel like you need to say y'all a little bit more often on our videos. So I'm personally requesting the y'all. But Joe is an interesting guy because like Joe is, I'm just going off my cuff right now. I want to talk about Joe for a minute because he's like everywhere. He's pretty embarrassed. He's probably glad he's hiding behind the soundboard, but he has control of my mic, so I got to be careful. But Joe, you work with our students in the student ministry. You've recently joined our tech team on Sunday morning, so he's back there learning the board. Obviously, our video production team, he's now part of that. You do anything? You're doing other things too? Like you're all over the place. Just anytime there's a random, hey, we need help with, Joe shows up. I'm waiting for the moment that he pitches our management team that he needs my job and should take over the stage. So he's just kind of all over. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your heart and all that you're doing around here. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to, yeah, that's worth clapping about, sure. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about Joe real quick is because we are on the cusp of one of the more exciting things that we've gotten to do here in the last couple of years, and that is in just a little bit more than a month from now, we're launching into our second service. 2 for 1, if you've seen that phrase out there in the giant banner, we've talked about that for a number of months, did a whole series on it a while ago called We Built a Boat. If you weren't here for a part of that, you may want to go back and check that out. That explains why we're launching a second service. But the whole heart behind it is 2 for 1, 2 services to reach the next one person. Plain and simple, more opportunities to attend gives us more opportunities to reach more people. So in January, on the second Sunday of January the 14th, we're launching our second service. And I've just been thrilled to see how many of you have really stepped up and said, all right, that's time for me to get involved now. And we have been trying to bolster all of our volunteer numbers in all the different areas, from parking lot to everything else. And while there's still a couple places that could certainly use more help, probably the one place that has the most opportunity for you to get involved in right now is Frontline, which is everything that takes place downstairs at the hub and beyond. So what's the hub? That's the place where they just talked about it. The big counter downstairs that does kind of like the walk in the door and get a hello. They do, they hand stuff out at the doors. There's a lot of things that they do that are very behind the scenes, but they're like the 2% of what happens on a Sunday that makes up 80% of what gets accomplished. And I don't ever want to underestimate the role that those of you that already play, and those of you that could also play. Like I remember years ago going to a church that launched, opening Sunday, I walk through the doors, and I get into the parking lot, and I get this like really, really friendly, like, how are you doing? Welcome. Now, some people mistakenly assume that I'm an extrovert because I'm up here on the stage every week. I'm not. Take me off the stage, I'm a total introvert. If you know me, then you know that's true about me. Like if I'm off the stage, people are like, he's kind of a jerk. No, I'm just introverted and really awkward. So when I come walking into this parking lot and I get like super friendly, like Barney the dinosaur, hello, I was a little bit like, whoa. Then I get to the doors and I get another one. Hey, I'm like, geez. Then I get to the second set of doors and there's 2. Hey, I'm like, I'm almost done with this whole thing. Then I get inside the doors. I'm not kidding you. There was a gauntlet I had to run through just to get to the auditorium. Hey, buddy, how are you? High five. I'm like, I'll punch you. It's just like, some of you, you're like that, and you don't want to walk into a place unless you get 50 hellos. That's not me. And I have a suspicion that that's not most of the people that come to Paradox. We want to be acknowledged, right? I want to go somewhere. I want to come to a church, and I want to know that people knew I was there. I want to know that they cared, but I don't want to be like abused with hellos. Hello. And what I love about our Frontline team is that I think they hold a really good balance of that, is that they work hard to make sure that not just the task gets done, but that we're acknowledged as we walk in the door, but we're not overwhelmed with it. So here's why I'm saying all of that, because there's a lot of opportunity still for us to miss the mark going into that second service if we don't staff that team appropriately. The last thing I want, there are administrative things that team does, and those will happen, and we need help with that, but here's what I need more than anything else. I need to make sure that every person that walks through these doors, particularly come that second service, knows that we knew they were here and feels like it mattered. And so if you're not a part of anything at Paradox right now, or you are a part of something, but you've got a little bit more bandwidth and could still do something else, the hub. the front line. That's where I would love to just encourage you to go and push you towards. And if you're any interest, or even you just want to know, okay, well, what exactly do they do? Kristen runs our hub, and she is going to be outside at the table, directly out these doors. There's the little corner of the cafe. There's a table set up. You can't miss her. Actually, here she is right there. Wave. So if you could just go see her afterwards, talk to her. There's no strings attached. If you just want information, walk away. She's not going to haunt you down. She's going to send people to do that. And we're just gonna tell you how you could get involved if you want to get involved there. So there's my pitch for Frontline and getting involved in the hub. So we need to jump back into our series because today, anybody else feel like December snuck up on you? What the heck? I feel like the other day it was just like, hey, somebody tapped me on the shoulder and I turned around and December smacked me. It's like, December's here. Well, December's exciting because obviously it is a Christmas season. We love the Christmas series that we usually have. That starts next week. Today we're wrapping up the series that we have been in called Core Strength. We have had one simple verse that has created one simple idea for us that has been the thrust of this whole series. And every week I've started with that verse, and today will be no exception. If you have a Bible, here it is. If you don't, or you don't want to get there quick enough, watch it on your screens. Philippians chapter 2. The Apostle Paul, who wrote this originally as a letter to the church in Philippi, thus Philippians, said this in verse 12. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence. I love that because what he's saying is you're not phony. You're not just playing Christianity. What you've done when I'm there, you've also done when I'm not there. The way you act on Sunday is how you're also acting on Wednesday. He's saying, listen, I get it. That's good. But then he goes on and he stresses, but here's what he's going to ask. Even though I know this is the real deal for you, you're not playing your Christianity. He says this, and this has been our key phrase. Continue to, say the word, work out. Continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And so here's the question we've been asking ourselves this series. How do you work out your walk with God? How do you work out your faith? And to answer that question, we've been opposing two different philosophies when it comes to working out your faith. Maybe you would add more, but these are the two that we have used. On the one hand, we have the philosophy over here that we've just simply called the couch potato philosophy. You ever gone to the gym and seen the person that just kind of sits around and does nothing? Like these guys, check this picture out. We have it? Yeah. Like I see this all the time at the gym I go to. Like there's this one guy, I swear, I don't think I've ever seen him do anything. He just walks around with a wife beater tank top on like this all day long. I don't think I've even seen him pick up a weight. And then you see people like this all the time that are just on their cell phones like, dude, that's not gonna do anything for you. Like you gotta do something when you're there. Sometimes we can get this idea that just because we come on a Sunday that's all it takes. I'm gonna become everything God wants me to be. I'm gonna grow in my walk with God. Now this is an important part of it. It's an important step. But if you just assume that simply being here on a Sunday is the one and done decision to grow into all God has for you, that's like sitting at the gym, like you're there, but just being on your phone all day and not actually putting up some weight. So the other philosophy that we've talked about is this. Again, it's very simple. Workout philosophy. It's workout Christianity. It's the idea that for me to grow in connection with God and to grow into the fullness of all that He has made me for will not just happen because I want it to. I'm going to have to put in some serious effort. And so we've been looking at some of the core exercises of our faith that I think are the effort that really develop kind of the basic connection with God, that then leads us to depth in relationship with Him, that leads us to the greater things that He has made us for. So week 1, we talked about this book and the importance of being in it. How do you read it? Why should you read it? If you remember, if you were here, I actually sat on the stage and for about 15 minutes, I just kind of opened it up to a passage that I hadn't predetermined, like I hadn't read ahead of time, and I just did like, here's how I do this on my own with God. And we talked about why that's such a crucial part of your walk with Him. And then on week 2, Pastor Greg and Pastor Mike talked about climbing partners and the truth that this whole journey of Christianity cannot be done in isolation. Like you have to be connected to other people who are as passionate about you as they are pursuing God, and that together you are pursuing Him and all that He has in store. And then last week we talked about prayer. Like, what is it and how do you do it? And how do you have a regular, ongoing just interaction with God through conversation? And what happens if you don't? Like, what's the detriment to your walk with Him and to becoming who He's made you to become if you don't have that? So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to wrap it up with one more subject. And today, I think in many ways is an exercise of our faith that God gives to us for our development. That is probably the one of all the things that we'll look at that I think we sweep under the rug and ignore the most. So I want to pray, And I just want to ask that God would use my words because they're his first before they're mine, and that he would just speak to all of us, myself included. So let me pray. Father in heaven, I don't know why it is so often, I feel like I'm not saying this because it's just on repeat in my brain, but so often when I take a knee before you, I do feel like the verse comes to my mind that tells us that you are the one from whom all heaven and earth derives its name. Maybe that's just good for me to be mindful of before I speak, because I am no one. I don't even have a name without your authority. And so, Father, I pray this morning that your authority would be over this place, that your love and grace would be over this place. Thank you that I have the chance to get up here each week and to try to make sense of your written word to all of us, myself included. Thank you that even on days like today, I have the opportunity to talk about things that are a bit difficult to talk about and that sometimes we don't like to talk about. Father, I pray that you would be gracious to us, that your word would make sense, that it would feel alive, that it would feel meaningful and purposeful to us, that you would cut through resistance that may emerge, whatever that resistance is. And at the end of the day, would you, I pray, allow what is the core central message of the scriptures to come through, which is that you do exist. Your name is Jesus. And you are wildly passionate about us. You proved it in your incarnation, your crucifixion, and your resurrection. And it's in that name and in that truth that I pray. Amen. So anyone that's ever worked out before in their life, whether you've gone to a gym or just done it at home or whether you've run or anything, here's what we probably all know. Even if you've never worked out, you know this. Anybody that works out on any regular basis, you have certain muscle groups that you like to develop, certain muscle groups that you like to work out, certain things that people tend to lean more towards. Now, when I go to the gym, actually, I'm gonna need a little bit of help here. I love to pick on this guy. Where's Casey at? Casey Bueller? Sir, are you in here? No? He's on security? Well, tell him I need some securing to happen on the stage. Get him in here. So when I go to the gym, dead serious, Bill, send Casey in. When I go to the gym, one of the things that I see happen all the time is this dynamic where people tend to go towards one particular muscle group. And the muscle group that I see most often guys tend to go to, it's not just the upper body, but specifically, it's the biceps. Well, where's Casey? Is he not coming? I'm going to have to, all right, Doug, come on. I'm going to have to use you. Come here, Doug. Come here. This is, let me see, I got, what do I got up here? I got 30s, I got 10s, I got 40s. That's probably fitting for you. Go for it. So give me some curls. Show me how it goes. What do we do? There you go. All right, so this is it. I mean, this is when you go into the gym, this is what you got. Most guys, I'm going to use the 30s while you use actually, you know what? That's embarrassing. I don't want to do that like I'm trying to compete with you or anything. I'm going to go for the 40s. Seem like you're struggling a little bit there. How's that working out for you? Oh, I got a little bit too much swing going on myself. But here's what happens. Thanks. That's all I wanted to do. I really wanted to embarrass Casey, but you worked, so thank you. Here's what ends up happening is that you get these guys that go to the gym, and they work all upper body, and then they end up looking like this. You ever seen this dynamic? We got a couple pictures we can show? You look like these guys with these massive upper bodies and these skinny little chicken legs. I wanted to keep that up for just a minute. I wanted to take a real life picture this last week, and there was a couple of guys at our gym. Like one of them, I swear, looks like the guy on the right side. I'm almost wondering if that's him. And I wanted to take a picture of him, but every time I got my phone up, I'm like, oh man, he's gonna see me. And he might have chicken legs, so I'm outrunning him. But if he catches me, that dude was gonna snap me like a twig, so I'm like, I better not. But friends don't let friends skip leg day. I love that. Every day is upper body day, bro. And then here's a couple other examples. Like these guys. Guy on the right, like what the heck? Dude. So sometimes this happens where we get this mentality in the gym, I'm just going to focus on one muscle group and I'm going to ignore the others. So real life example, Mike Nank, who's one of our pastors on staff here, he and I tend to work out together quite a bit over the years. We're also very competitive with each other. And I feel it's my responsibility to share on his behalf and confess on his behalf, which is always easier, right? Confess on someone else's behalf. He doesn't put enough time into his legs. He tends to ignore them quite a bit. Matter of fact, I was able to snap a picture of the difference here. Yeah, that's what it looks like. So if you see Mike today, You may want to encourage him to put a little bit more effort into his legs. He has no idea. I can't wait till he's on stage again, see what he does. Here's what I want to talk about with you today. I want to talk about the muscle group in our spiritual development that we tend to overlook. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like, it's like the legs of Christianity. You go, well, what is it? Well, finish this phrase for me, would you? 3 things you should never talk about. Religion, politics, and money. Some of you guys are like, duh, you gotta be kidding me. I came to church today. I don't want to talk so much about money as I want to talk about generosity. One of the core defining characteristics of the God we worship is his generous nature. And whether you're talking about the generous nature of Jesus that's evidenced in the fact that he gave up his throne for a time and came to this earth to walk among his creation, or whether you're talking about his generous nature that drove him to the cross of his own free will, or whether you're talking about his generous nature demonstrated to us in grace and mercy, or whether you're talking about his generous nature that allows us to come to the presence of God, no matter how long it's been, no matter what we've done, whether you're talking about the generous nature of God that tells us in the scriptures he is presently preparing a space and a place for us in heaven, or whether you're talking about the generous nature that frankly provides everything that we have. You know, one of my favorite verses, and sometimes when pastors say favorite verses, I don't know that we always know what that means. For me, it means that this has been a verse that I have leaned on and had to trust in at different times in my life and has proven itself true over and over. It's a verse that David once wrote in a book called Psalms when he said, I was a young man, now I'm an old man, so he's looking over the span of his life, and he says, and yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging for bread. In other words, God takes care of those who walk in his ways, who are with him in all of his characteristics, who are with him in step. He says God takes care of them. Like, you ever had those moments where if you're a parent where your kids act like you never do anything for them? You know, what do you mean I can't have that? You never let me. And you have to remind them, I never what? Okay, the meal you eat, guess where that comes from? Me. The bed you sleep in, who bought it? I did. The roof over your head, pay the bills. How about the clothes you wear? It wasn't made by fairies. I bought them. You have to remind your kids every now and then, like, everything you have is because of my good grace. I actually said that to my son once out of frustration. He's like, you don't do. I'm like, everything you have is my good grace. I probably should go cool down and put myself in a timeout. But like sometimes you got to remind your kids, like, hey, everything is from me. Do you think it's possible that we do that with God? That we forget sometimes that every good thing, scriptures say that every good thing is from above. Do you think we forget sometimes and maybe we sound like our kids to God? But you don't and you haven't and why won't you? And he's like, what are you talking about? Did you turn a faucet on today? Guess who supplied that? Did you get in a car today? Guess who supplied that? Can you breathe today? Guess who put that air in your lungs? Do you think maybe sometimes we do the same thing with God? See, it doesn't matter what aspect of his generosity we're talking about. There is an undeniable truth that one of the fundamental characteristics of the God we worship is generosity. It's part of his nature. Likewise, what he asks of us as his followers who are committed to not just him but to his ways is that you and I would live with this unusual, open-handed level of generosity in our lives. Now, here's the thing too. I know every time this is a subject that comes up in the church, usually it starts to bring up our defenses in different levels. For some of you, maybe it's a low defense. To others of you, defenses just shot through the roof. And you're like, if I could sneak out the door, I probably would. So let me get a couple of things very clearly out of the way right up front. Number one, and maybe the biggest thing I want to get out of the way, I am not up here on this stage. Whenever I talk about giving or money or generosity, I'm not doing that for my own personal gain. If I was, I'd be taking cues from a pastor like this one.
There will be 50 people give $1,000, and do it right now, or I am finished. Try me.
What would you even do? What would you do if I did that one day? I hope you would bum rush the stage and just lay it out on me. I mean, like, that's a real pastor doing, if I was out for personal gain, I'd be doing stuff like that. I'd be taking cues from, listen, you know this. All you have to do is go online for 5 minutes and type up anything to do with money, church, or pastors and giving, And I mean, it's literally overwhelming, the amount of abuse and manipulation that goes on from stages like this and from people like me in settings like this when it comes to money and giving and generosity. I read an article just this last week of a pastor who, actually I won't say where he's from and all that, but there's a pastor who's on trial right now for how he's abused money in his church and how he's done stuff he shouldn't do financially. And I was interested in the whole thing, and so I watched part of the actual court session. And in the questioning, there was one point where they questioned him about a line in the church's giving that was dedicated to him for clothing. Like he had a clothing line. And they asked him about it because, now here's what blew me away. It was a $100,000 clothing line to start with. And what they were asking him about, which blew me away, wasn't the fact that he had a $100,000 clothing line, but that for the last 3 years, he had gone over that line. Right, and he had no receipts to show almost any of it. He had like $15,000 to show and validate any of the expenses, and he went on to talk about all of his suits. Listen, that might be an extreme example. There are tons of examples, even more extreme, less extreme. There's just examples everywhere of people that do what I do, standing on stages like this, talking to rooms like this, doing what God long ago in his scriptures warned us we better not do. Ezekiel chapter 34. Listen to what the ancient prophet, once instructed by God, said to people like me. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. That's me. That's people that do what I do. That's people that are in position of authority and leadership in churches. And he says, prophesy against them. And this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds. You clothe yourselves with the wool and slaughter of the choice animals. In other words, you're eating good. You're dressing fine. You've got a $100,000 clothesline. It says, but you don't take care of the flock. You don't take care of the flock. So I debated for a couple of days whether or not I wanted to say to you what I'm going to say next. And I'll say it, and maybe for some of you it won't be a big deal, but I so desperately want to stress to you that I don't talk about this subject for my own personal gain. So I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm going to tell you that over the last couple of years, I've been approached several different times by a couple of different churches and offered positions to come on staff with them. And every time it was a church that was larger than ours, where the salary I would have earned would have been far more than I make here. If I was only up here talking about this subject for my own personal gain, I wouldn't be here. I would have taken one of those jobs. I am not here talking about this subject for my own personal gain. And some of you might go, yeah, but maybe churches in general, that's what they're doing. Like, okay, so maybe you personally don't, but corporately, churches just want more bells and more whistles and more stuff. Can I tell you, in all honesty, the staff that I work with here and the leaders that I work with here, they are some of the most frugal people I have ever met. Like, I don't think you guys realize on any given Sunday, half of what we do here is held together by smoke and mirrors and fishing line. Like, duct tape is our friend. Like, I'm not kidding you. Sometimes people are like, I can't, you guys just do incredible things with all this stuff. No, you should see. It's barely held together half the time. Matter of fact, if you were here last week, I don't know if you caught this. This light right here, this is a different light that we had to move over here from somewhere else in the room because this light actually went out. It like totally went kaboom. Hey, Brandon, is that you back there? Grab that light in the back room. I totally didn't plan this. Can you just grab that? Just in case anyone's like, but the light works. You're making up a story. So this light went out. And like anywhere on this side of the stage, I was totally in the dark. So like last week, if you're here, it was like, where'd he go? There he is. He disappeared. It was awful. You couldn't see anything. They have fixed and refixed that light multiple times. This is actually it. Chris Lemon was back there this morning trying to unscrew the thing, and he got so frustrated because there's like 85 screws that he gave up on it for now and was going to go back to it later. But that's the light that was there last week. And those things aren't cheap. But they have continued to fix it and refix it simply because they're not going to buy it if they can fix it. I'm telling you, the people I work with here, and not just in our creative department, I've seen this in every one of our leaders across the board throughout this church, are so stinking frugal. And they really do respect that the money here is first from God and then out of your hard-earned wallets, and they treasure it, and they treat it as such. I have really valued working with them and appreciated them. Now, I'm also going to be clear because some of you are like, so what are you just saying? You guys don't need anything? No, absolutely. Will we benefit from more? Certainly. If I'm being really frank with you, I would tell you this. We are operating under budget, and we have been for a while. And for a church our size, we do not bring in enough money. And sometimes that makes things really difficult. And sometimes it makes things nearly impossible. but God has been good, and we've figured out how to rub two pennies together and sometimes make four out of them. But yeah, it's been a struggle sometimes. But please hear this. I have never stood on this stage and talked to you about money or giving or generosity for my own personal benefit or just so we can go get more stuff. So if it's not for my benefit, if it's not for this building's benefit, then whose benefit is it for? Yours. For yours. Because friends don't let friends skip leg day. And this is the one exercise of our faith that, frankly, most of us as Christians love to ignore and not develop. So I want to share a story with you that comes right out of the scriptures and out of Jesus and a time that he had with his disciples that it's not a typical story to look at when you're going to talk about generosity and giving, but I think it's a story that goes right to the heart of the issue, and I think it's a story that also paints the dangerous alternative if we don't develop this part of our walk with God of what we risk and what might be the cost. So Luke chapter 5 is where the story is. If you have a Bible, open it up. Or if you, did anybody even carry this anymore? Everybody's got it on their phone these days. Some of you do, good. Some of you use it on your phone. So if you're using it on your phone, grab your phone. If you're going right to the scriptures, grab those. If you have neither, again, we put it up on the screen. Luke 5:1 says this. One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. And he saw at the water's edge 2 boats that were left there by fishermen who were washing their nets. Now, here's what I believe about the Bible. Every single detail in this book is important. There is no word, there is no phrase, there's no detail that's insignificant. It wasn't like, well, that had to go in there, it's filler. Like if we really believe, which I do, that God, his authority, breathed into these pages what he wanted here, then every single part of this book is important. So this is why I say this, because part of the practice of reading the Bible has to include that we look for little details that often can easily get overlooked, because here's what I found. So often it's the little details that pack in so much of the principle and the point. So there's a detail here I want us to bookmark, and we're going to come back to it in just a minute. Here's the detail. One question, we'll point it out. How many boats? 2. All right, bookmark that because we're going to come back in a minute. Verse 3 says this. He, this is Jesus, got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him. He asked him to put out a little from shore. And then he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. So here's the scene. Jesus is teaching, crowds are gathering, they're pressing in, and he's finding himself pressed closer to the water's edge. And so he's got one place to go if he's going to keep moving. And where is it? Out on the water. Now, even if you've never been to church before in your entire life, and today is the first time ever, I'm going to bet that every single one of us are familiar with one of his more famous miracles that involves water and that involves his power over water. What would it be? And he walked on it. Right. So let me ask you this question. Why did he ask for a boat? Why did he ask for a boat? Because we know he has the ability to walk out on the water. He could have just been like, all right, here we go. I'm just going to step out here. Like he could. Look what I just see. I just went in the dark again. He could step out into the water. And we also know not only does he have the ability to, but that would have been one heck of a visual that would have supported his claim that he was God. Right? Because you go, well, he did it once before. Do you realize that when he did that, he only did it for his disciples? Everybody else didn't see it. As far as we know, he never did anything like that in front of all the masses of people. But here's Jesus very early on in his ministry saying he is God. Had he stepped out on that water, that would have been one heck of an illustration to support what he's saying. Right? I mean, because if I was to stand up here today and go, hey, guys, I need to share something with you I've never shared, I am God. Like, I'm going to assume there's a lot of reaction going to happen. That's all going to culminate, hopefully, into one end. You're going to drag me off the stage and never let me up here again, right? That should happen. It better happen if I ever say something like that. However, if I put the baptismal up, filled it up with water, and then walked across the top of it, you're all going to sit there and go, I don't know, he might be. Maybe he is, right? Like, he could have easily just walked out there. Like, hey, I'm just going to take a hike out on the water. I don't need the boat. But why did he ask for the boat? And while we're talking about the boat, let's talk about it. Like, because this isn't just a leisurely item. Like, anybody in here that has a boat, your boat is leisurely. It's what you take out onto St. Clair. It's what you take up north. This isn't a boat of just leisure. This is something far more for Peter. It's at least a couple of things. Number one, it's part of his identity because he's a fisherman. Boat, fisherman, fisherman, boat. Right? A boat to a fisherman is kind of like a hammer to a carpenter, a calculator to an accountant, unless you're Greg Meehan. It's all up in his head. Guy's a genius. But there's certain tools that based on what you do, they kind of represent you. This is part of his identity. It's also part of his heritage. We know that the custom is that what you do, your dad probably did, and his dad probably did, which means his dad fished these waters. His dad's dad fished these waters. There's a good chance that that boat was used by his father or his grandfather. There's a part of his heritage that is wrapped up in this boat. And then plain and simple, it's his income. This boat is the way he goes out on the water, that he catches the fish, that he sells at the market, that turns into the money, that pays for his bills and feeds his family. Do you know Peter was married? We can assume then that he probably had kids. This is how he supports them, is this boat. I almost wonder if when Jesus asked, "Can I use your boat?" if it wasn't reflective or a bit foreshadowing of what he would ultimately ask Peter for, which would be everything. So it's made me wonder this last week, like what makes up your boat? What makes up your boat? Now, in a talk like this, you would probably assume that I'd reach for my back pocket and go, "Oh, your wallet makes up your boat." I hope not. If your money, your source of income, if that defines you, that's probably a very frustrating reality, maybe even a sad one. So I doubt that that's your boat. Like what heritage, identity, income, like put it all together. So here's what I thought for myself this last week. Like my keychain kind of represents that. Like the keys on this chain will give you access to almost everything in my life that matters most to me. For example, this one here. That one gets you in my front door, where the four most important people in my life exist. My son, and my wife, and my two little girls. This one gets you into the house where people above anybody else in this world matter most to me. How about this one? That one starts my truck. My Ram. You go, "That's the most important thing?" Well, let it kind of bring in everything else. All my toys, all my stuff, all my things. Maybe even my income is kind of all the stuff in this world that I'm not taking with me. That is a benefit, it's enjoyable, but it's all going to burn away one day. It just ain't going to last. It's going to rust or it's going to tear or it's going to go away. But that's all that stuff. And it gives you access to some of it. Now, here's another one for me. This one here. Some of you have a key like this one. It's a key to Paradox. It's a square key. We have printed up. The guy that printed them for us thought he'd be clever and put the name Jesus on every key. Now, listen. I know I'm a pastor, but I don't, anyways, I'm going to get that remade. So this key, now, anybody else in here in this room actually right now has, because some of you guys, there's a couple of these around. Anybody have one of these? Hands up. Anybody have one of these? Anybody? Okay, a couple of you do. Guess what? None of you have this one. Because all these keys have a letter on them. A, B, C, and D. Tim, your key, it doesn't have a D on it, does it? No. You got B, yeah. You know what D means? It means I can open every single door in this building. It's not all that impressive, but it's representative of the fact that this is my job, it's my call, it's what I believe God made me for. It's the place I get to go and I get to serve, but I also get served. It's the place that's rewarding for me to pour my heart and soul into. See, every key on here gives you access to the things in my life that matter most to me. What's your boat? And what defines that for you? Because here's the reality. For those of you that think God's after your money, let me just tell you this. He's not after your money. I guarantee you that. He's after way more. He's after everything that makes you you. Not just your money. But when he has you, he has everything else. And isn't it interesting that the God of creation asked Peter, and I love that phrase. That hit me different this time around when I was reading this passage. Verse 3, he said, and he got into one of the boats that belonged to Simon Peter, and he asked him. This is God. This is the one who created those waters, who made the trees that got turned into that boat. Like he's asking him if he can use. It doesn't say, and he commanded him. He instructed him. He told him. He said he asked him. God will never demand your boat from you or anything that's in it. He'll ask, but he'll never demand. So my daughter, she went through this kick a couple years ago where her favorite food, like candy, was Starburst. You Starburst fans? There's only one good Starburst. What is it? Did somebody say yellow? Are you human? Yo? There's a church called Heritage down the road. We love them. And no, Pink. Pink are the best Starburst. So my daughter, she loves Starburst, and they had this sale for it was buy 4 for 1. And so this is 2 years ago. So I'm like, I'm just doing the dad thing. So I grabbed 4 and I came home and I gave her she's like, oh, thanks, Dad. And so I said, hey, she started opening them up and I saw the pink ones. I'm like, oh, I love me some Starburst. So I said, hey, honey, can Daddy have one? And she goes, nope. So I thought she was playing, so I went to grab one and she moved them away. And I said, sweetheart, can I have one? And this is what she does. She was biting, I think it was a yellow one. She bit half of it, pulled it out, and then went like this. No. Number 1, I don't want the one you've half eaten. Number 2, I want the pink ones. The problem is she likes the pink ones too. Those are her favorite ones too. So she kind of suggests that I take maybe other colors, but still is very guarded of them. I said, no, honey, can I have a couple of the pink ones? And she goes, no. So then I thought, all right, I'm gonna illustrate this moment. I'm gonna instruct her. So we talked for a minute. I'm like, honey, let me talk to you about generosity and sharing, and God's heart is to share. So I'm like, I'm gonna really teach her in this moment. I'm gonna do a good dad moment. And so then afterwards, I'm just assuming, of course, I can have one. I said, so honey, can I have a couple? No. So I'm not gonna lie, I had a brief moment where I thought about just grabbing her and moving her and taking what I wanted. I bought those for you, and she, no. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I let her have her Starburst. So here's what was so cool. 2 days later, this is back when my office was at home. 2 days later, I walked up into my home office, and there was a pile of Starbursts. 4 of them, actually. There's 4 Starbursts, pink Starbursts, sitting on my desk. And you go, are those the Starbursts? No, I ate those long ago. There's 4 Starbursts on my desk, and there was this note that she had left them on that, sitting on my desk. This is what she writes to me. Dear Daddy, I love you, and I love you so much that you're the best dad ever. And this is what she closed with, and you are handsome. It's on there. It is on there. And then she gave me her 4 Starbursts. You know what I loved so much? I actually did keep those for quite a while, and then they just kept crying at me to eat them, so I finally did. But what I loved is that in that moment, she had to really wrestle. You go, it's just Starburst. Well, you know what? For you, God looks at all your stuff and goes, it's just Starburst. For a moment, she had to wrestle with what she was going to do. And I gave them to her. I could have overpowered her. I could have just taken them. I could have shamed her into it, but I didn't. And that invited her for a moment to wrestle with what to do. And in that wrestle, she decided that she wanted to give some of them to me. And what I loved is that there was a clear, generous shift that took place in her. You might go, oh, you're overreading it. Maybe, but I think that there is a simple, subtle, generous switch that got flipped in that moment. That's what God's after. He's not after your stuff. He's after, for me and for you, a generosity that will switch within us, that will mirror and mimic the generosity that is His demonstrated to us on a regular basis. God's not about taking your stuff from you. But here's the thing. Even though God's not about taking your stuff from you and He'll never demand your stuff from you, that doesn't mean that He won't ask. Right? He asked Peter to put out from shore. That doesn't mean He won't ask when it's a little bit difficult. Here's the next couple verses of the story. It says this. Go back to Luke chapter 5, verse 4. When He had finished speaking, He said to Simon, hey, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. And Simon answered him, Master, we've worked all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I'll let down the nets. Quick question. How much did he catch? Nothing. That's called a bad day at work. Has anybody ever left work and you're mid-route on the way home, even on a good day, and you've thought, you know what I want to do right now? I want to turn the car around and go back to work for a few more hours. Nobody's ever done that, especially after a bad day. You're not like, I should go put in a few more hours. No, nobody. This is a bad day at work. In other words, say it this way. Nobody wants to be generous when their nets are empty. Nobody wants to give when it already feels like resources and finances are tight. Sometimes God will ask when our nets are full, and sometimes God will ask when our nets are empty. Sometimes when they're full. Sometimes you might go, whoa, you know what? Why doesn't He fill my nets and then He can ask? That'd be a lot better. Right. Let's go back to the story. Verse 6. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. And so they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and to help them. And they came and they filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and he said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken, as were James, John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. And then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." So what he's doing is he's beginning to forecast to him, even though Peter doesn't get it yet, he's forecasting to him the position he's made him for in life. When he says, "You're going to fish for people," he's like, listen, this whole fishing for fish thing, yeah, that's great. That might pay your bills. That's not what I've made you for. You're going to fish for people. I have made you. I'm going to position you for something far more than this. And he begins to kind of tip his hand towards that. And then it simply says this in short. And so they pulled their boats up on shore and left everything. And they followed him. So in the years to follow this experience, because this is one of the earliest moments with Jesus and the people who would become his disciples, obviously one of them being Peter, this guy. And so in the years to follow, what would happen is that Peter would become one of Jesus' closest allies. And then he would become one of Jesus' closest friends. And then he would have a moment where he'd make some dumb decisions. And he would kind of backslide. And as a result, he would experience a level of grace directly from Jesus that no one had ever yet experienced from him. And then he would go on to be the first person ever to preach to the biggest audience and most diverse audience of people. That resulted in him then experiencing, in one day, seeing thousands of people dedicate their life to Jesus. And then God would use Peter to start and to spawn the movement and the momentum of the church off of Peter's early efforts. And so all of that got me thinking this last week as I was getting ready for this morning. What if Peter would have said no? What if Peter would have said no? The detail that I had you bookmark, what was it? How many boats? Two. Do you remember the name of the other guy? So Peter owned one. What was the name of the other guy? No. It didn't say. It didn't say. You go back to the text. Watch this. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats that belonged to Simon. There's no name for the other guy. Here's what it got me thinking. Every detail is important. Why is there a detail that there's 2 boats? We don't know the other guy's name. I'm inclined to believe that had Peter said no, we'd probably never have known his name. I think that just possibly God allowed the detail of 2 boats to be included to make sure that all these years later we would realize Peter wasn't his only option. Peter wasn't his only choice. There were other people he could have asked who just possibly could have ended up becoming the people he positioned into his work and into the start of his kingdom. Peter wasn't the only choice. But Peter's early generosity positioned him for God's future opportunities. Do you get that? Peter's generosity positioned him for God's opportunities. In other words, before Jesus began to move Peter to his position that he had made him for, to be who he made him to be, to do what he made him to do, before he moved him towards his position, he first asked him to be generous with his possessions. Or say it this way, before he filled his nets, he asked if he could use his boat. Would you allow me access to your stuff to get out there for a little bit? And I really do believe that part of the reason that second boat exists in the story is to make sure that we realized that part of what allowed Peter to end up being who he was, doing what he did, and being in alignment with the purposes God made him for is that early on when Jesus said, "Will you?" Peter said, what? Yeah. Yes, I will. Now, I think that there's a couple of ways typically that I've watched us, and by us, I mean just in general within the church around the world, that we tend to respond to God's requests for generosity, particularly when it comes to his church. Because here's the thing, like we have like different levels of okayness when it comes to generosity. Like you want to talk about being generous in other places, we're like, okay, sure. But for some reason, when it's generous with the church, that's where we get most guarded. And to a degree, I get that because there's a long history of abuse in the church when it comes financially. But that still tends to be the place that we're the most guarded and most defensive. And so here's what I have seen becomes our response a lot of times. A couple different ways we respond. Number one is that we say yes, but we do so out of guilt. right? And this is, so I'm trying to think, like, how else do we do this? Where else do we give out of guilt? And there's areas that we can come up with, different examples. Here's the one clearest. When you see somebody on a corner asking for money or asking for food or begging, right? Maybe you're a rare exception, and maybe you're the person that pulls out everything you can, and you're just as generous as possible, and you're joyful as you do it. But most of us, what do we do in that moment? We pretend like we don't see them. We act like they're not there. Or then if we do something, it's usually, okay, I'll speak for me. You own it if you need to. I give out of guilt in those moments a lot of times. And when you give out of guilt, what do you end up offering in that moment? A lot? Abundance? Or scraps? Scraps. God is not a homeless guy asking for a meal. But if we treat him like that, and our sense of giving back to God is out of guilt, don't do it, because you'll just give scraps. And then here's another way that we can sometimes give to God, is just out of obligation and responsibility. Well, I'm supposed to. So I waited tables for years. Outback Steakhouse. Welcome to Outback Steakhouse. Good day, mates. You've been here before? Couldn't stand that job. But I did it. Helped pay for our wedding years ago. But when you wait tables, there's a certain expectation at the end of the meal that if you're dining in, you're not just going to pay for your bill. You're going to what? Tip. You're going to tip. I've never met a single person that loves tipping. I've never met anybody that goes, you know what, when I get to the end of the meal, I just love tipping my server. Like, nobody does that. You do it out of obligation. You're like, I've done that. Okay, maybe you have. Nobody else does, but good, we'll learn from you. But most of us, the rest of us, don't do that. We do it out of obligation. We conclude things like this. Well, I mean, I didn't have to get my water. They got my water, and so they ran my food to me. I didn't have to go get my food, so I suppose I'll tip. Because if you go pick up carryout and there's the tip bucket there, do you tip? You don't tip. I don't tip, because that's what I tell myself. You didn't even do nothing. I bagged it. You don't tip for that. But when there's a certain sense of obligation, you'll do it. But you tip. Just give a little bit. You give the expected. You give the tip. God is not a server waiting on tables who needs your tip. Here's another way that we approach this subject. Well, I want to. My nets are just a little bit empty. And if my nets get a little bit fuller, then I'll give out of my full nets. I'll give out of the overflow of my nets. What if? This is where I have to trust that God will enable you to believe that I'm not trying to manipulate you in this moment. What if it's possible that God's position for you and his desire to fill your nets will follow your generosity, not precede it? And if you go, I don't think you're reading into the story. No, and that is a principle all throughout the Bible that you see. In a book called Malachi in the Old Testament, is one of the things that he confronted his people for. You know that God actually told his people because they weren't being generous financially back to him, he actually said, you're robbing. And then he said, but if you will trust me with your tithes and offerings, he says, I will dump so much blessing on you, that he actually uses the analogy of a storehouse. He says it won't even be able to contain it. And there's other places. There's a story in the Old Testament, one of the prophets coming to a widow who had no food left. And the story tells us she was literally just preparing for her and her kids to die. And he comes to her with like her last meal, and he's hungry too, and it's in the season of famine, and he says, would you make me some food? So she's like, well, I guess we'll all go out together because I got nothing left. And he says, well, if you just trust me. So she does, and she makes him a meal. And there's this supernatural event that takes place where her food just multiplies, and she's given back what she needs. Like, you see this principle in multiple places throughout the scriptures. That our generosity precedes God going, hey, guess what? I own all of the starbursts. I don't need you to give them to me. What I'm after is a shift in you of generosity, that you would become more the person I made you to be. Because our world would be better with more generous people than less generous people. And when that happens, guess what? I'll dump all the starbursts on you that you want. And sometimes that comes financially, and sometimes that comes in peace, and sometimes that comes physically, and sometimes that comes relationally. But God says, I have it all. I own it all. It's already all in my hands. God never asks because he has need. It's not for his benefit. It's for ours. So I think the last way that we can approach the subject is this way. And this is where my wife and I and our family has tried to go this direction when it comes to this subject, is out of trusting obedience. To say yes, but out of trusting obedience. I mean, that's what Peter said. When Jesus came to say, hey, go back out in the water, Peter said, hey, we fished all night long, and we've caught nothing. But since you say so, I will. And I love just the conflict almost in those two sentences. Because on one hand, he says, okay, I'll do it, but he makes sure to tell Jesus before I'll do it that it doesn't make sense to him. Because I've already been out there, I've already done what I can do, and nothing got produced. And I'll be honest with you, that my wife and I, so here's how we've approached this subject. Throughout the course of our marriage, we have made it a practice and a principle that for us, we believe this is what the scriptures points us to, that trusting obedience means our starting point is just 10%. If you want to get practical, there it is. We do 10% of our combined income, and we give it back to God. And we've done that the course of our marriage. I actually added this up at one point, and I realized that over the course of our marriage, we have given enough money to the church between the two of us that we could have gone and bought a house outright in cash. And we don't regret a penny of it. We've done that because we really believe everything we have is already from him. But I'll also be honest that there are some months where I'd like to use that money for something else. So there's the trusting part. There are months that it's like, ugh. I mean, there are months that our nets, they haven't been empty, but boy, they haven't had a lot of fish in them. And over the years, there have been times where it would have been a lot easier just to say, no, never mind. Hey, God, I work for the church. There's my sacrifice. But we just don't believe that that's what God invites us to. And as a result, I can just tell you, for our lives, this has been my experience. I absolutely believe that part of that trusting obedience from us has led to the position he has moved us to be used in so many different relationships. We really do believe that it's part of the decision we made to trust and be obedient with our finances to him that has allowed that our nets have constantly been full. I mean, not overwhelming sometimes, but boy, God has never, that verse, David said, righteous have never been forsaken, children never begging for bread. That's been our experience in life. God has taken care of us, provided all that we need. Life is good for us. God doesn't ask from you because he needs from you. It's not for his benefit. It is for yours. When I ask, it's not for my benefit. It's not for Paradox's benefit. It's for yours. This is the paradox of giving. See, when we give to anything else in this world, it is to get back. Like when I pay my dues at the gym, it's so I can have access to go in there and work out. But when we give to God, it's because we've already gotten. We've already received from him. And what he asks us to do is to continue to walk in step with his generous nature. I'm just convinced that there's so much more that God still wants to do, not just through this church, but through every single one of your individual lives. Things that I'm promising you wouldn't even imagine right now if I was to tell you. I don't even know what they are. God knows anyways. But if he was to start to whisper them to you, some of you wouldn't even believe them. And I'm telling you, there's more he wants to do through us. There's more he wants to do through you. Much of which I just don't think will be accomplished until more of us say yes. Not to my benefit, to yours. Not to Paradox's benefit, to the kingdom's. Father, I am thankful that I get to talk about difficult subjects, and a subject that, frankly, the church has messed up so often and has manipulated to their own personal gain too often. So would somehow, in your supernatural presence and just grace, would you speak in ways that I can't, to places in all of our hearts that I can't? Would you keep talking to me, God? I don't ever want to get to a place where I think I've done enough, opened my hands enough, been generous enough. So keep speaking to me as well with these words in a very gracious way, in a very loving way. Would they continue to whisper into my ears over the next several days and weeks? And would not one of us walk out of this room convinced of or hearing anything more than there is a God. Jesus Christ is his name. And you, Lord Jesus, are wildly passionate and absolutely nuts about every single one of us. In your name we pray. Amen.
I don't know about you guys, but I want to be willing to say yes to God. The more that we trust him and we are obedient to him, the closer we get to his face. And that is where we experience his generosity. Would you guys sing closer with us and take a moment to let God's love wash over you this morning?
Hey, so if you have the opportunity or interest to get involved in one of the opportunities that are available in Frontline, head right out to the table on your way out the doors. Otherwise, I just want to be the last voice to say to you, you are so loved. Thanks for spending the morning with us, and we'll see you next Sunday.